And welcome back to our broadcast. Got my jersey, my North Carolina jersey on. For those of you who can't see listening on the radio, have it here for our viewers that tune in over the internet. I'm a big North Carolina fan. Went to the University of North Carolina. Had the great honor of being the first recruit of legendary basketball coach Dean Smith. Tar Heels are about number 6 in the country, playing some feisty basketball, so I'm cheering them on. Football season's over. We're winding down. The NFL playoffs. Will be into college basketball, which I am a big fan of, really love. I cheer on the LSU Tigers number basketball team. So today, a little more casual with my Carolina jersey on. Governor Mike Huckabee of Arkansas, former governor of Arkansas, stirred up a real hornet's nest down in my neck of the woods by some incendiary statements he made last week. He was talking about global warming, I believe, but he said that New Orleans and the deep south coast did not heed the warnings of Hurricane Katrina. Here's exactly what he said. He said, I understand the natural impulse to stay and defend your home, but you can't fight a flood. The people of New Orleans had plenty of warnings to evacuate because Hurricane Katrina might land a direct hit, but many chose to stay anyway. And I'll tell you, it was not received well. Whatever support for Huckabee down this way was dramatically underwritten by those statements. He's saying that people just sat around and ignored the warnings of Hurricane Katrina coming in. I lived this, folks. This is something we'll never forget. This is the mother storm of all storms. And I can tell you that Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans and the Gulf Coast on a Sunday. On Friday evening, about 6 o'clock, I'm driving down the road and going to do a radio interview myself. And on a local station, I heard the head of the National Weather Service give the call about 6 o'clock Central Time, saying there's been a dramatic change in the direction of Hurricane Katrina. New Orleans is now at risk. And I said, my gosh, I've heard nothing about the hurricane. I knew it was going towards Florida, not New Orleans. Now, at this point, there's only about 40 hours before the storm hits. And so the defensive procedures began. Now, here's the problem in New Orleans. In most cities in this country, there are a number of ways out of the central city. You've got a variety of ways to evacuate. If you look at a map, you'll see New Orleans is, if you can't evacuate into the Gulf of Mexico, and that's about 50% of the direction you would head. If you go north from New Orleans, you hit Lake Pontchartrain, the largest man-made lake, I think, or it wasn't fully man-made, but the largest lake in the United States, has the longest bridge I know across it in the whole United States. So you're landlocked to the north by water. There are only 2 ways out. There are 2 ways to get out of New Orleans, one to the east and one to the west. They're both interstate. They both go over water. There's no land way to get out of New Orleans. So to evacuate 1 million people going 24 hours a day with contraflow, no way in, you wouldn't let people in. You'd go out both on the 2-lane roads as well as the shoulders. It would take you 3 or 4 days. 1 million people evacuated out of that greater New Orleans area in less than 40 hours. So there was a massive effort to evacuate. And so to accuse the people of New Orleans and the greater New Orleans area, Louisiana, to not evacuating is a real slam. I lived through that. I know I chose to go to a funeral on that Saturday morning before Katrina hit on Sunday. And then at that point, they said the storm is going to be direct hit, get away, do whatever you can. My sister lived down the lower part of New Orleans, a place called Plaquemine Parish. And I called her and I said, look, I'm going to find some way to try to get you. I couldn't find a helicopter. She said, Jim, don't try. I'll just get in the contraflow and work my way out. It may take me what should have been an hour trip, 10, 15 hours, but there's just no way for you to get down here. At the time, her husband was the sheriff. So if the sheriff couldn't get his own family out, you can imagine the tense ways we're going. And so the storm came in. And then, of course, the great news was, those of you that remember Katrina, the storm didn't do much damage. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't Katrina. It was the collapse of the levees. I can tell you one quick story, if I can. A lot of people were at my home up in Baton Rouge, about an hour and a half out of New Orleans, out of the storm's path. We weathered the storm. Several of the folks called home and said, everything's fine. There's been a little damage, some limbs down, a few shingles off the roof. Come on back home. And then about an hour later, the call came out, don't come back because the levees have broke. the water is rising. That was man-made. That was the Corps of Engineers, Mike Huckabee. That wasn't the people of New Orleans. They rode out the storm as they often have, but and for good reason. There was not much danger. Hurricane 1 wasn't that high a wind, but the levees broke. The Corps of Engineers designed and built levees collapsed under the weight of the water, and that's what caused the massive damage that did so much destruction down there. So, Mike Huckabee, you got it wrong. You got some apologizing to do. People of New Orleans are very defensive. People of the Gulf Coast are very resilient. They stand by getting out from these storms. It's just a little hard to do because the federal government dropped the ball. I'll be back right after this message. Glad you joined us today, and hope you go to my website, by the way. I wrote some, before we take the break, I'll tell you about history. I wrote about how history can be affected by one event, and I wrote specifically about the Battle of New Orleans. So go to the website, check out my column on how a historic battle in New Orleans, the Battle of the War of 1812, the Battle of 1814, the Battle of New Orleans, changed the course, not just of Louisiana history, not of American history, but in my opinion, the history of the entire world. Take a look. I'll be right back.